Welcome to the spirit world, answering your questions on angels, demons, and how the spiritual and physical worlds interact. And now your hosts, Debbie Georgianni and Adam Bly.
Well, hello there, and welcome to the Spirit World. I am Debbie Georgianni with religious demonologist and co-host Adam Bly, and you today. We're opening up the phone lines. Why? Because the entire show is about Saint Padre Pio. Now, remember, his feast day is Monday, September 23rd, so we want to definitely start remembering this great saint ahead of time and ask for his help, because we live in difficult times. And Adam, Padre Pio was very close to Saint Michael, the Archangel, so we, as and always, we begin with the Saint Michael prayer.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Okay, so we have Libby and Anna on the phones, and they are ready, willing, and able to answer your call about Padre Pio today. And this is how we're going to discuss this great saint. Most of folks in the Catholic world, they always talk about his spiritual gifts, all the many gifts that he received, Adam, the gift of bilocation and prophecy and reading souls, and it goes on and on and on, all the amazing gifts that Padre Pio received from God. We're going to talk about his prayer life, his spirituality, because that's how it can relate to us. And we really and truly want to uncover that and look at it from all angles so that it can help you understand this great saint better, get close to him as a friend, because he is an incredible saint, and all the saints want us to get to heaven. But Padre Pio is very, very active. Those that are very devoted to Padre Pio know that. The spiritual sons and daughters from all around the world, when Padre Pio takes on somebody, he takes on the entire family. And he said he could do much more work when he died than when he was living on this earth. I don't know about that, though, because 81 years, he did a lot of work here when he lived. So we're going to talk about his spirituality. That's why we titled the show St. Padre Pio, Pillar of Prayer. And we are going to go into a little bit of his life story, the timeline of events that really were very important in Padre Pio's life. But we're going to talk about him and how he viewed God and what he felt about God and what he felt about his own spiritual depth. Okay, so the question we're asking today of our Spirit World listeners, and by the way, Adam, please wave to everybody on social media, because we have a lot of folks going strong with the chats on Facebook and YouTube, X, Rumble, Instagram, and TikTok. Wow, you guys, this is so exciting. The socials are strong, and it should be strong for Padre Pio. But Adam, we want to ask our listeners to call in, and here's the number, 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. We're being produced by the Guadalupe Radio Network, so thank you, Tim Mott, our producer, doing a fine job. And Libby and Anna are going to answer your calls. We're being broadcasted all over the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, so we should be getting calls, because everybody loves Padre Pio. We should be getting calls all around the world, actually. So 877-757-9424. And Adam, we're asking our listeners today to call in and share their friendship with Padre Pio, what they love about Padre Pio, how Padre Pio has impacted their spiritual life, if they've had any encounters, or miracles attributed to Padre Pio, or if they know of any and they want to share it today. This is the show to do it. So that's the question we're asking, and Adam and I are going to talk briefly a little bit about Padre Pio and his depth of spirituality, and then we will go to the phone. So please start lighting up those phone lines. Don't wait till the end of the show. We're gonna make it about you today and hear your stories about Padre Pio. But Adam, I know we always want to begin, obviously, with some facts about his life.
Yeah, Deb. So one of the things about Padre Pio is you hear a lot of stories repeated, and some things, in a sense, become legend, and sometimes they're changed or they're taken out of context. So we're not going to go over his whole life today in terms of his biography, but for those that want to look into his biography, there's a really good book available on EWTNRC.com. That stands for EWTN Religious Catalog, so it's EWTNRC.com. There's a book there called Padre Pio, The True Story, Revised 3rd Edition. And you might say, well, why do you need to revise it? Don't we know all the facts? Well, part of the issue is so many people wrote about him from so many different perspectives at different seasons of his life and with different perspectives on him. The other thing is many people took things from his many letters that he wrote to his spiritual children that were meant as spiritual direction for those particular people, and those quotes were taken out of context, and so there sometimes lead to misunderstandings. And so this book is a really good attempt to continue to get back to kind of just the facts and the verifiable information about Padre Pio. So check out that book. We'll put a link to that, I think. I think our producer's going to put a link to that also connected with the show for people. But that's a good place to go. So most people think of Padre Pio, they think of the stigmata, and they think of the miracles. And he did have the stigmata. So he initially was born in 1887. He died many years later in 1968. He had a very interesting life. But he also had a holy life filled with miracles that led to strong reactions to him. And also there were strong reactions to the stigmata. It started in August of 1918. He wanted to keep it hidden. He didn't want the attention. He didn't see himself as holy. He saw himself as a sinner, as we all are. And he wanted to keep that kind of private and hidden, but that wasn't God's will. But it caused strong reactions in other people. He also was really big on health care. He actually served in World War I, as many Capuchins did. They were drafted. He served in health care, working during the war, working in terms of taking care of soldiers. Mm-hmm. And he later founded a hospital, which was the Home for the Relief of Suffering Hospital.
State-of-the-art hospital.
Mm-hmm, it was
with
a research
helicopter
hospital.
Landing pad and everything. Yeah.
Yep. And so he kind of quarterbacked that hospital coming into existence. So he was big on healthcare throughout his life. Really interesting personality, strong personality. And we were talking before the show, some people think he was gruff and kind of mean in confession. And it wasn't always that way. He was stern with people when it was necessary, when that's what the person needed in confession. But there's other people he was extremely gentle with because that's what that soul needed. But people tend to repeat the stories of where he was more gruff. Right. So he was certainly firm about sin, but he wasn't a mean person by any stretch.
So real quickly, I don't know if you've ever traveled to San Giovanni Rotondo, where he is laid out in the church there, and then you can up on the hill you can see the beautiful state-of-the-art hospital that he founded, which is incredible. My husband and I and my mom, we traveled to that area in 2013, and it is unbelievable. It's so beautiful, and what he did with that hospital, like I said, he didn't want it to make it feel like that people were going into a hospital. So there's a lot of bright colors. It's beautiful. It has, just some of the best medical professionals there. I mean, it really changed that whole area, that whole region of Italy because of what he did. And let me tell you, he got a lot of criticism because remember, there was that whole scandal of the, misappropriation of funds and stuff of donors' money and all sorts of things and people surrounded that hospital. So he took a lot of heat for that hospital, and it turned out to be such a blessing for the people of that area. And see, that's kind of what happened his whole entire life, Adam. Everything he did that was really extraordinary and good for other souls, he came under fire by people who, out of jealousy, or they just didn't want to see him reach that kind of level of fame and notoriety, and he didn't want any of that. that, but they didn't want to see it, including the Vatican. And so he was really, here he was doing such great things for souls on one hand, and on the other he was struggling trying to make sure he could even do his ministry work, because he was constantly being judged for everything, and all these scandals and controversies. So there was a lot that surrounded his life once he became a friar and he was ordained a priest. There's all the way to almost just a couple years before his death in 1968. He was filled with a lot of things coming at him that really was, he was under persecution, and it was, but he never wavered, Adam, never. And that's part of the spirituality we're going to talk about.
So to get a sense of Padre Pio, I think I'm just going to run through it really briefly, Deb, but pick up on anything you want to focus on. But let's talk about what his day was like. You get a sense of the man from how he spent his days. So he woke up at 3 a.m., he prayed for several hours and meditated to prepare to say Mass. Mass was the center of his life. The Eucharist was the center of his life. So here he is, 3 a.m. He gets up, he's praying alone and meditating. He celebrates Mass at 5.
Which sometimes could last 4 hours. Go ahead.
Yep, 2 to 4 hours, because he would become enraptured and just so transfixed by what was going on and so awestruck by what was going on at his hands on the altar. And people would clamor to be at those Masses and witness them because of the grace they received and the holiness and the reverence with which he said the Mass. He would then, after Mass, he would pray in thanksgiving for a little while, privately.
In the choir, sometimes they were in the chapel. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then it was confessions. And, depending on the day, he would hear confessions total throughout the day, sometimes 8 to 12 hours, if he could fit it all in. But basically, he'd start after Mass, after he said his prayers of thanksgiving, he'd hear confessions until noon, because he's on a schedule. He's a religious, so he's on a fixed schedule. So he hears confessions until noon. And that's when, the bell rings and they have to move on to the next thing. He gets a brief recreation, a very brief nap. He then gets up. He's doing the divine office, by the way, which is the daily prayers throughout the day that all religious, in fact, all priests, all clergy are promised to say when they're ordained. So he's praying divine office with the other friars. He's praying rosaries all the time. He then, after the rosary and the divine office, right after his brief nap, he is then reading and writing letters. He read and wrote so many letters, it's staggering. I've not been there. You've been there. You were describing, they have a part of the exhibit for him is the collected letters from just 1 year, and it's how unbelievable the volume of them. He was getting correspondence from all over the world, partly because of the stigmata and that he was so well known as a confessor. But, honestly, probably largely because people were wondering about that and they wanted to tap into somebody who seemed to be so close to Christ.
Mm-hmm. May I add to his day a little bit, because you just said something and I don't want to forget it. So think about this, folks. We get ready to go to Mass, and Mass is around an hour, right? So we get ready to go to Mass, and sometimes we show up a couple minutes before Mass, right? And then we leave, we get in our cars, and we get on with our day. Think about this. He prayed before Mass. He prepared himself before Mass. Then he entered into a Mass that, like you said, Adam, lasted 2 to 4 hours, because he would be so. They said sometimes he would almost. It would look like a statue. He would go so still during Mass, and then he would weep because he was just so close to our Lord and the passion of our Lord, because he carried the wounds, the stigmata. He also privately carried the shoulder wound of Jesus. When Jesus was carrying the cross, the shoulder wound, which was the most painful wound, he carried it his whole life and never told anybody about it. Okay, they found it after his death. But I'm going to hold it there. But I want to share something about this, Adam, because this is so important of what he did after Mass. After Mass. Okay, this is so cool. So here's the number if you have something to say about Padre Pio, or maybe you have a different understanding of Padre Pio. We'd like to hear from you. 877-757-9424. Please call in. We're very friendly, and we'd love to hear from you. We'll be right back. Stand Tall is now offering advanced group coaching sessions with master coaches highly trained in life skills. Visit standtalltoday.com and register for one of our upcoming group coaching events. These virtual opportunities are designed to take you to the next level of life in your relationships, career, faith walk, and so much more. Space is limited. Hurry to standtalltoday.com and sign up for one of our advanced group coaching sessions. standtalltoday.com.
This is Dale Ahlquist with a Chesterton Minute. Psalm 1, verse 1 says, "Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stand in the way of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers." What does that mean? Don't hang around with bad people? No. According to G.K. Chesterton, it means something much better than that. He says that there are certain people who, because they are really pure, create a good atmosphere around themselves. They are truly children of light, and the light shines on everything they touch. When a righteous person stakes out a clear position, we recognize that it's something solid and vital and eternal. So it's not that hanging around bad people makes us bad, it's that being righteous can help make the people hanging around us righteous too. Want more than a minute? Chesterton.org.
The Spirit World continues with Debbie Georgianni and Adam Blai. If you have a question for the show, call 877-757-9424 or email tsw@grnonline.com.
Okay, we hope you join us talking about Padre Pio today. St. Padre Pio, pillar of prayer. We're talking about his prayer life, his spirituality. So we wanted to offer that to you on the Spirit World. And we also want to say thank you to Padre Pio because his feast day is coming up on Monday, September 23rd. And we just felt it was very important to dedicate this entire show to him. He's one of our go-to saints. We absolutely love him. We believe we're friends with him. I humbly admit that I do. I've received confirmation from various people that I think he has accepted me as a spiritual daughter. So that means my whole family is taken care of. So I'm very grateful to Padre Pio. Absolutely love him, and I feel like he's been very active in the ministry work that I've done for the past. I think I became friends with him just in the past maybe 15, 20 years. So I would say that after he was canonized, and so I would say that I feel very close to him. I think it's safe to say that. But some of the stories that I've heard are from people who knew him very well, and also people that I've watched on different various videos and podcasts, which, by the way, you can get DVDs and all sorts of things at the same location that Adam mentioned earlier, EWTNRC.com. Just search in the button Padre Pio, and you'll see there's a ton of items on Padre Pio. So you can pick up some of those DVDs. But people that knew him well back in San Giovanni Rotondo commented and gave interviews at him. And one of the things they said was after Mass, okay, so he prayed before Mass. He was at Mass with tons of people there just filling that chapel, that beautiful Our Lady of Grace. And then after Mass, he would go to the chapel or to the choir loft or somewhere where he could be alone, and he would sort of complain to God that he didn't have enough time to pray. And I find that so interesting that he would complain to God, and here he was round the clock, Mass and confessions and prayer, but he would complain that he wanted more time with God. And I think that is so beautiful. So you were giving the highlights of his life. Let me just go back just a little bit. You talked about how he wanted to serve those who were sick and suffering, and that's absolutely true. That's how he conducted his whole life. That's why if you go to San Giovanni Rotondo, you almost don't want to leave there. It's so incredibly beautiful. You can feel everything that he did there. But I just wanted to say that, Adam, when he was 5, he committed his life to God, and he was so young, and he was very close to St. Francis of Assisi. He was very close to St. Michael the Archangel. Apparently, he carried a piece of the the true cross in his pocket, of course, with his rosary. And so he encouraged everyone to be close to St. Francis and to St. Michael as well. But as a small child, he used to talk to Jesus and Mary and his guardian angel, so much so that he would say to his mom, and his friends, doesn't everybody talk to them? Like he just assumed it was so natural. So it's clear that he was open at an early age, and God was using him. And Padre Pio freely admitted that he was an instrument of God's. He never said he was perfect. And even though he received all these spiritual gifts, Adam, he never was saying, oh, look at me, I get it right all the time. You can ask me any question. I know the answer about the future and everything. In fact, he got certain events wrong at times. And he admitted he's human. He was human, but God was using him in great ways. So I wanted to share that because it does apply to us. We can relate it to us of how God can use us.
Yeah, the saints, I think that's how God uses the saints for us. The gift of the saints and their stories is that we can see another human being that we can relate to. We can see oftentimes their struggles with sin in the earlier part of their life and how they move towards God with God's grace. And there's many different types of saints and stories so that we can take heart and be encouraged. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's through the saint's stories, sometimes it's through what they taught. So Padre Pio's call was basically immediate, 5 years old, and then he just followed that his whole life. Most of us don't have that call. I've talked to many priests who did have the call at like 4 to 5 years old. They knew immediately in life. But maybe that's not you. But what you can get from Padre Pio, you can be inspired anyway, even if that's not your same pattern. But the things that he wrote and the miracles that happened connected with him. For instance, the innumerable stories about him in the confessional, mm-hmm. reading hearts and knowing the sins of people and encouraging them to confess the sins that they were hiding from him and that they had never confessed or brought up. And of course, he never violated the seal of confession. These are the people give interviews and say, I went to Padre Pio for confession. I had never told anybody these secret sins earlier in my life, and he told me what about so-and-so? What about the time you did this? And that was a gift from God for them to be reunited with God, their friendship with God restored because they wanted, God wanted them to confess this. So mm-hmm. he can help us in many different ways. But the saints are just such a gift. Yeah.
Well, and let's talk about the confessional. He 3-minute confessions, people would walk out of there either, really freed of everything or really troubled because he threw them out of the confessional. And then there was all this controversy of, remember, scandal was around his whole entire ministry life. He used to only hear confessions of men only, and then it was opened up to women. They used to have to get tickets. They had the locals on one side, they had visitors on the other. People would come in, and there was that big controversy where I guess apparently some folks at the friary put microphones in the confessional, and when Padre Pio found out, he was furious because there's no way that seal of the confessional was going to be broken. And so everybody was trying to look at him. They weren't sure how to accept him, especially his peers and people who were in authority. They didn't know how to grasp this because it was so enormous it was so big of a ministry work. The fact that I believe he spoke Italian, Latin, and I think a little bit of French, and yet he could translate and talk in other languages when people would visit him, or he would write in that, and they would say, well, are you getting a supernatural assistance? Well, he was getting assistance by the angels. He admitted all that. So it wasn't like, and people didn't know how to grasp that, Adam. Now, when we see that or we hear that, we're going, okay, this is just so far beyond us. There's no way we can be like a Padre Pio. There's no way we can have that kind of, gigantic ministry work with all the help from the angels and Jesus and Mary. I mean, it's unbelievable to even listen to. It's almost like it's too much for us to grasp. But if we take it down to our own lives, you look at how God helps us, our guardian angels help us individually. You look how God helps us every step of the way. So God is doing the same work in us. It's just maybe not as huge and international as Padre Pio, but it's still there. The core is still there. And so it's our job to tap into it. The beauty of what Padre Pio did, Adam, is he was open, obedient, humble, and he was willing to be used, and so God used him. And you're not going to put limits on God.
Yeah, and it's important to remember too that he was obedient both to God, but he was obedient to his vows to the church completely. So, many people have heard that there was a period of time where he was suppressed. He was told, you can't say public masses, you can't hear confessions, and that was in 1931. He was forbidden from saying mass publicly, and he had to withdraw and basically not live in total isolation. He could see the other friars, but no more interacting with the public for about 2 years. And then slowly those restrictions were lifted over the next 8 years. So he had about 10 years where he was dealing with that, but when the news was brought to him that he could no longer minister to the public in 1931, he just said, God's will be done.
That's right.
And so he was immediately obedient to the hierarchy of the church. But as you say, he was also obedient to God, what God was asking him to do in terms of bearing the wounds and letting that be known, as opposed to trying to find a way to keep them completely hidden. Mm-hmm. He allowed that to be known, even though he felt very
he was embarrassed by it.
Yeah, and
mm-hmm.
conflicted, and not wanting people to think that he's holy or special.
Exactly.
So this was a man who really wanted to be obedient. He wanted to honor the vows that he took.
Right, and he wasn't embarrassed because it was. He was obviously probably extremely humbled that God would give him those passion wounds. Absolutely, but he was embarrassed because he didn't want that kind of fame, and yet every time he tried to run from it, there was more. All over the world they found out about him. And we're going to talk about Vatican II as well. They consulted him. And so look at John Paul II, knowing him when he was a priest, and then being part of his canonization. And it's so important to understand this, because I think that's the beauty of his humility, is that he tried so hard to not draw attention to himself. And yet God said, no, this is for my people, and that's why he rose to that level where everybody loves him. And he really changed the way a lot of people felt about even war, about dying and death and suffering. And it goes on and on, the impact Padre Pio made in this world. So Adam, let me just do this. We had Dolores on the line. Dolores, call back if you wanted to share something. We're going to go to the phones next. 877-757-9424. If you have something to say about Padre Pio and how he impacted your spiritual life. I know Dolores was just on the line. Maybe Libby and Anna got a comment, or we can maybe share that maybe next week on our open forum show. Or you can call back at 877-757-9424 and share your Padre Pio story, because his feast day is Monday the 23rd. Please fill up the phone lines now. We're going to go to the phones in just a moment, and we'll get to Joseph and the others. But Adam, more you want to say about this? You can tell that I very much love and admire Padre Pio. I struggle every year, and I'm going to also be doing a show on Padre Pio on Monday on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. And I will tell you, Adam, that I struggle because that recent Hollywood film that came out about Padre Pio was a disgrace, was an absolute horrible depiction of this great saint, in my opinion. And it troubles me, because when I see these saints that have done such extraordinary things in their life and wanting so many souls to get to heaven. That's all he ever wanted, was souls to get to heaven. He talked about that at the end of his life, that God wants everybody, and he wanted to help and be part of that, to get souls into the beatific vision. I struggle so much when I see that Hollywood or the secular world takes these beautiful, holy men and women of God and they just tear them apart, and that is so unfair to do. And so that's why at this show, I can feel my blood pressure going sky high, because I want to kind of protect in some way the saints, because they just lived such heroic lives of virtue. So we're talking more about Padre Pio. Adam's got more to say about this, and we've got more to share. St. Padre Pio, pillar of prayer today on the Spirit World. We'll be right back.
My family left the church because of a very negative experience with a specific priest, and that took my whole family away from going to church for a long period of time. There were other Catholic churches, and there were great Catholic churches and great priests, but we stopped because of that one specific instance. And in a way, I was cheated out a big part of my journey in my life because we weren't in the church. In life, it seems like we're always enslaved to something, and I think that's basically what our culture is all about right now. Is we are enslaved to power, or to greed, or to wealth, or to lust. But there's a true freedom to not be enslaved, but to attach ourselves to God and to be free. My involvement in the church, my relationship with God, is who I am. It's what gives me my identity. Thank God I'm home.
If you've been away from the Catholic Church for whatever reason, we invite you to take another look. Visit CatholicsComeHome.org today.
Do you have some major decisions to make in your life? Are you feeling lost and alone? Not sure what path to take? Life coaching just may be the right option for you. Whether it's to practice accountability or create a better plan that works for you in life, we are here to serve with Christ always at the center. God's plan is always the best for us. We just may not be able to see it right now. Let us help. Secure your absolutely free consultation today at standtalltoday.com.
The Spirit World continues with Debbie Georgiani and Adam Bly. If you have a question for the show, call 877-757-9424 or email tsw@grnonline.com.
Okay, Adam, we could probably do 10 hours on Padre Pio because we're going to get to the phones now, and there's so much to say and not enough time. I want to thank our show team, Tim and Anna and Libby. You guys are doing a great job. Dolores called back and left a note. We're going to get to that. That's very interesting, Dolores, so hang on. I'm going to answer that for you. Adam, you've got more to say. Can you also mention that we've got the National Center for Padre Pio, and there's other shrines around the country and around the world dedicated to Padre Pio, but we wanted to give our listeners time to maybe research more on him before his feast day on Monday. Also, Tim, our producer, is posting on Facebook at the Spirit World Podcast. We've got a National Catholic Register on very interesting facts about Padre Pio. We'll be posting that. We'll be posting about where you can get some of his resources and books on EWTNRC.com. We're going to be also anything else that Tim feels that is interesting for our listeners. He will post it there on Facebook. So join us there and grow the family there. So Adam, more that you wanted to say about Padre Pio before we get to Joseph.
Yeah, just real quick. For those that live in the United States, we have a National Center for Padre Pio in Bartow, Pennsylvania, which is kind of southeastern Pennsylvania, out in the country there. I've been there. They have a number of his undergarments that are still have the blood stains on them. They have one of his gloves that they pray with people with. It's protected by plexiglass, and a lot of really good educational materials. There's probably something similar in most countries around the world because he is such a well-known saint. So super quick, Deb, I just want to finish the day that we started so people get a sense of him. So we were at mid-afternoon. He has said Mass, he's gone to lunch, he's had private prayer for about 2 hours. Then he goes back into the confessional for several hours. Then at 4:30, it's Vespers and Benediction, which is the Vespers are the fixed prayers that he said with the other friars. He had about 10 to 15 minutes he would spend in the garden after Benediction. Supper was usually juice and a cracker, so extremely light. He ate very little as the years went on. And then in the evening, he would either write more letters or give a talk to people, do some catechesis. They'd pray again, Compline, which is another time of fixed prayer with all the other friars. Then he would study Scripture and pray privately till about 12:45 in the morning. And then it was time for matins, which is the prayer in the middle of the night that everybody got up and said. At 1:30 in the morning, he would lay down to sleep. Guess what? At 3 a.m., he woke back up and started it all again. So about an hour and a half of sleep and a brief nap in the afternoon. Did this for decades. So this is a person who is praying and studying Jesus and telling people about Jesus and writing to people about Jesus and doing the sacraments all day, every day. Just amazing.
Well, and that's why we've got to state it again that he received help, okay? Because obviously when you hear his schedule, you're like, there's no way anybody can endure this and translate in all these different languages and work all day long and hardly sleep and hardly eat. Well, of course he received help because he was obedient, he was willing, he was able. And by the way, he was a very sickly individual. He struggled with a lot of illnesses, okay? And so, I mean, he had that working against him as well. So he was receiving a lot of help, and that falls in line with what we know about angels, guardian angels. When you are given a bigger mission and you accept a bigger mission from God, you are given more heavenly assistance to accomplish that mission. And he was given that, and along with the spiritual gifts he received. Adam, if you can pull up the show document, I'd love for you to read about Joe from Waco, Texas. This is interesting. And we're going to get to Joseph in Ann Arbor, Michigan in just a moment. Joseph, hold on. But Dolores called back from Pottstown, Pennsylvania, and said that, this is so interesting, said that her daughter married a Forgione, which Padre Pio's birth name is Francesco Forgione. Okay, and so she wanted to know if there's any type of if they can be related. What I would suggest for Dolores is to call that national center, wouldn't you say? Because Dolores is in Pennsylvania and the center is in Bartow, Pennsylvania. Call that center and find out if there's a way you can figure out if the family is connected. I think that's fascinating, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's possible. It'll take the genealogical research, but yeah. It's possible. Yeah, so Dolores, do that. I think that would be amazing, and maybe you could get connected with the Forgione family. And Adam's going to share about Joe from Waco, Texas in just a moment, but let's get to Joseph in Ann Arbor, Michigan, who's waiting so patiently on EWTN.com. Joseph, welcome to the program.
Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Yeah, I am just totally fascinated by Padre Pio's ability to bilocate. And I was just wondering, has the church been able to record how many times that occurred? Is he the only saint that's ever done it? And I recall hearing somewhere that a person, I guess, asked him a rather ridiculous question about it, as if, did he know when he was doing it? And he was rather gruff in his answer and like, yeah, of course I knew I was doing it, you know? So, I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Okay, so let me just comment first, and let's see if Adam has more information about this. In some of the biographies and different writings about Padre Pio, they talk about how many, they estimate how many maybe confessions he heard, the millions of confessions and this and that, and how many times he visited people. They try to grasp a number with it. But I can tell you, Joseph, knowing that he lived 81 years and he had so many miracles and so many extraordinary gifts surrounding his life, even as a small child. I think it would be hard to capture the number of things. But the other thing that you just said about Padre Pio and bilocating about other saints, yes, other saints were able to bilocate if that's one of the spiritual gifts that God gave them. And so, Adam, what do you say about that? So interesting questions, Joseph. So for people that don't know
the way he described bilocation is he would be in prayer. He'd be maybe praying for one of his spiritual children that he had letters with, or he would be praying for a conflict somewhere in the world or something along those lines. And he would suddenly, from his experience, he would just, in his imagination, he thought he would be there with the person, but it was more than imagination. And he would be in this place he had never been. He could see it clearly. It felt to him like he was there. And the people would report seeing this old Capuchin friar, or younger if he was younger at the time, appearing and saying something to them and maybe giving them a blessing or something like that. And then Padre Pio would experience that he was back in the chapel, at the friary. So it wasn't something he did where he intended to do it, like, I'm going to exert my superpower and I'm going to appear over here because I want to. It happened when God drew him to a place to show him something to pray for, because God wanted more grace in that situation and wanted that person to receive that consolation or whatever it might be. Okay. There's no official list of recordings of numbers of times because the church doesn't go around and exhaustively research every single claim that Padre Pio appeared to somebody. That would take forever. They only exhaustively research the miracles of healings that are used to lead to canonization of a saint. So they will do that for the beatification. When they're declared blessed, they'll exhaustively research the one healing miracle to be absolutely sure it was real. And then the same for the canonization when they're declared a saint. But they're not going to go around and say for sure this happened, because they're innumerable with Padre Pio. Tons of people claim that he did this, and they just don't go around and validate every single one.
But if you go to San Giovanni Rotondo, like I said, when they have the bookcase there where they stuffed all of the letters that he received in 1 year, they tried to go through a lot of things at the friary and tried to figure out and do some, estimates of it. But I think doing that, I agree with Adam. That's unfortunate because again, we're trying to, contain God. God was using Padre Pio and he was using him in very big ways. And as for gifts of bilocation that were given, quite a few saints had the gift of bilocation. I believe Saint Faustina was one of them as well, correct? I believe so.
I believe so. Yep.
Yeah. So, Joseph, does that answer your question? It's really extraordinary. That's why I hope people do dive into the lives of the saints, and that's why we wanted to explore his spiritual life, his prayer life, because we can start to bring it into what we do every day, so that when we're grumbling like, "Oh, I've got to go to Mass," no, we don't have to do anything. We get to go to Mass, and we should properly prepare the best we can, in a small way, but similar to Padre Pio. What do you say, Joseph?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I was wondering, could I also touch on, more of a general question about stigmatists and the stigmata? Is that, from what I understand, every stigmatist has the wounds appear in their hands. And, of course, there's been the debate as to whether, was Christ nailed through the hands or through the wrist? And if you take a look at the shroud would indicate that Christ was nailed through the wrist. So I got to wonder why are all the stigmatist wounds appearing through the hands?
Okay, so Joseph, first off, different stigmatists down through the church's history have had different wounds. It is true that the hands are very common, but it's not universal. So there have been a few cases where people only receive the wounds on the head from the crown of thorns, for instance. In Padre Pio's case, he had the hands, the feet, the back, which you can see the bloody undergarments still at his national shrine in Bartow, Pennsylvania. I don't believe he had the head, or at least I've never heard of that or seen photos of wounds on his head. And he had the shoulder, which a number of them have had. But it varies, Joseph. There is no absolute rule with stigmata. Now, part of the question about this is the Greek word for wrist in the Greek language, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure on this, means technically everything from the elbow to the fingertips. Mm-hmm. And so in the Greek version of the scriptures, that were later translated to Latin and then eventually to all the other languages, when they say hand, the word there in the Greek just means somewhere between the elbow and the hand. Now, we also know some stuff from Roman history because the Romans had systematized crucifying people. They had done it thousands of times, and they had a very specific way of doing it. And we are pretty sure that they used ropes to carry the weight of the body and lash the person to the crossbeam, and that the spike was put through the hand probably because there are so many nerves in the hand versus the forearm. It's much more sensitive. And the idea was to create the maximum pain before a person dies. And so everything about crucifixion was designed to maximize pain while allowing the person to live as long as possible. And so it would make more sense that it would go through the hands if that was the philosophy of the Romans, and we know it was.
Well, and I think, Joseph, what you're alluding to is that when they examined the Shroud of Turin, they were determining that it was through the wrist. But I've also heard people speak about it that it could be the angle also, Adam, the angle of it, that it's almost like it hit both, went through the hand and crossed through the wrist. So it could be both. I've heard that as well. So it's a very interesting. I see why you're bringing it up, Joseph. I had the same question as well. Have you heard that, Adam, about the Shroud of Turin being a little bit different from what we understand from Scripture?
Yes, and there have been some stigmatists where it was closer to the wrist.
Right.
The thing we need to remember about the stigmata and the experience of the passion that people get is it's specific to that person, and it's only partial. And so no one human could bear all of the suffering that he bore. And we see that play out with the stigmata in that usually people don't have and experience all the different wounds and all the different pain of the passion story. And so God is working with people in different ways to carry a portion of that cross, so to speak. And so we have to be careful about saying, like, well, God can't do it this way, because it's something that's done through the lives of that particular person.
Particular saint, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing, too, is I agree with you, Adam. I don't recall about the head wound for Padre Pio, but I think, I don't quote me on this, but I think on one of the things I've read about Padre Pio that he did have headaches. So the headaches could be an internal portion of the head wound. Joseph, does that help? I hope that helps today, but you could do more research.
Oh, yeah.
There's a ton of it on the internet.
Oh, thank you so much, guys. I wasn't aware that Padre Pio suffered from the scourging on his back. That's really something.
Well, and actually, Padre Pio said the shoulder wound was the most painful that he carried the whole time,
right.
and he kept it very quiet. Yeah, he kept it very quiet. It was the most painful. Yes.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I got to do some further research. I love this.
There you
Thank
go.
you
I
so
do
much.
too. I know you. I tell you, you can spend hours, but the good Lord multiplies the hours, Joseph. So you'll be blessed for it. God bless you, Joseph.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to get to Martha. And yes, guys, we determined early on, our producer, that we're not going to take another break. We're going to do this lightning round of calls now, so don't worry. Martha in Florida is up next on Divine Mercy Radio. Hello, Martha.
Thank you. Thank you. So good to be with you.
Same here. We're so glad you called. Go right ahead.
Well, I wanted to share my experience of Padre Pio. I first knew about him in the late 90s out in Bologna, Italy, and saw a poster of a priest, a friar, a monk with these gloves, and that, alerted my curiosity. But that was about it. And unfortunately, my brother passed away in 2004, my very beloved brother Anthony. And I had this prayer card of Padre Pio. He would do a novena to the Sacred Heart. And I would pray it, and I would cry and sob and pray, and I even rattled off the little Italian that I knew, asking Padre Pio to please help my brother, through his transition, and to forgive his sins. And I did this with all my heart and soul. And at times, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I would bleed out of my nose. And I just thought, well, that's because I'm crying and whatever. And I didn't give it much credence. But every time that happened, I still didn't give it much credence. And then I just welcomed it and didn't care. But that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling, and this sounds radical, and I'll ask God to forgive me, but I believe that Padre Pio gave my brother absolution after death. And I know I've never heard that before, but that's the gift of the peace that he has given me, because his whole ministry was hearing confessions. And sometimes he wouldn't give absolution if he didn't think the person was contrite. And yet in my heart, I have always thought that he heard me and that he blessed my brother with Padre Pio's absolution. And I just wanted to share that, you know. Mm-hmm. Padre Pio is amazing. I went to San Giovanni Rotondo a few years ago with my husband, and it was an amazing experience. And he has touched so many lives, and he always said, people will know of me more even in after death. And I believe that to be true. And he did suffer so much, not only his physical pains, but his spiritual anguish. And he used to say, because I've read all his biographies, that he would give Mass, and he says, if you only knew all the souls that are here, it's not just the physical ones that are here, but the spiritual ones that are here, and that they come to the Eucharist. And I hope that all your listeners are blessed today, and I hope that those that are not familiar with Padre Pio would read about him, will learn about him, because he is truly the saint of our century.
Yeah. Well, Martha, I just wanted to share, based on the reading that I've done over the years of Padre Pio, there were numerous times when people would come up to him when he was alive, and they would say, you know, my family member passed, you know, are they okay? Or, you know, and he would kind of peek into the other side. He would say, I don't see them here, or I do see them here. And he was all about bringing comfort to people, to the loved ones of people that have passed. He was all about that. And he wanted everyone, of course, to find their way to Jesus, to get to heaven. And so I love that you feel so connected, and you made that pilgrimage to San Giovanni Rotondo. I agree with you. I feel the same way. When I went, I said, wow, I got to go back again. In fact, I wanted to live there, and I didn't want to leave. It was so beautiful. But I will tell you that I think that is so consistent with what I've read about Padre Pio, that he did want to bring comfort to people, Adam.
Yeah, and he still does. There are so many stories of him still appearing to people that have prayed, often not realizing it's him. They'll experience what they think is a real flesh and blood, you know, Capuchin comes in the room in the hospital and prays over their child and walks back out, and then they find out there is no old Capuchin working at the hospital at all, and nobody had seen him come or go, that kind of thing.
That's right.
There's tons of those stories of him doing work in his sainthood. And yeah, you know, he was all about bringing comfort, for sure. You know, he wanted us to pray for the poor souls. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the reference to the souls being present at Mass, you know, the old understanding was the poor souls are present at Mass, benefiting from the Mass also. So, yeah, just, you know, take it all as encouragement to continue doing similar work. And it's the basic work of the Church, and that's what he was all about.
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you, Martha. Terry in, Minnesota on Real Presence Radio. We're not going to get to you today, but you're welcome to call back next weekend on our Open Forum show. And Joe from Texas and the others, you can call back next week. We'll put you at the front of the line. Thank you so much to our call screeners. Anna and Libby, you did a great job. Tim is doing a fabulous job at the controls. Thank you to all the affiliates that carry the spirit world. We are so grateful to EWTN for getting it far and wide. Adam, I wish we had longer to talk about Padre Pio, but his feast day is Monday, so I hope our listeners really get to know him better. So that's it. Until next Saturday, Adam and I wish you a beautiful and blessed week. We'll see you real soon.